The wall came down in silence, not the silence of absence, the silence of something so vast it swallowed sound whole. Kalen dropped to one knee, arms locking around the princess's unconscious body, and the void flame closed over them both like a fist. Would it be enough? 6 hours earlier, the palace orbital grid had flagged a routine maintenance cycle in Sector 9. Kalen had picked up his toolkit, drank the last of his cold coffee, and thought nothing of it. The solar anomaly hit without warning at 14:32 station time, a harmonic spike so rare the ancient palace systems had no protocol for it. Kalen had been elbow-deep in a coolant junction 3 corridors above the ceremonial wing when the lower reactor screamed. The lights dropped. Then the heat arrived. By the time he reached the corridor overlooking the ceremonial chamber, the void flame was already alive in the walls, not burning so much as existing, a deep violet combustion that didn't flicker or spread, but simply was, filling the room like solid light given malice. The palace guards stood at the perimeter in a tight, motionless line, visors down, weapons useless. Their commander was shouting something into a comm unit, her voice sharp with the specific panic of someone who understood exactly how inadequate the protocol was. Kalen looked through the observation pane, past the flame, to the collapsed crystalline pillar pinning Princess Valia to the chamber floor. He did not think about his contract or the statute forbidding non-royal personnel from entering restricted ceremonial space, or the fact that the emergency respirator clipped to his belt was rated for standard chemical exposure and nothing else. He thought about the angle of the pillar, the approximate weight of crystalline alloy, and whether his footing would hold on a floor that was almost certainly compromised. He sealed the respirator, squared his shoulders against the guard commander's shout, "Stop! Human, that chamber is sealed by imperial decree," and pushed past her into the fire. The heat was a pressure more than a temperature, something that pushed back against his chest with each step. The void flame didn't burn his skin. It burned the air around him, and the air burned him, and the distinction stopped mattering quickly. His hands found the pillar. His legs found whatever grip the fractured floor could offer. And he lifted. Valia's face, pale beneath the fall of her silver hair, turned toward him in the moment before her eyes closed again. He had her up, arm locked beneath her shoulders, when the exit detonated. A deep structural crack split the archway, a secondary cascade failure from the reactor overload, tearing through the load-bearing columns, and the ceiling beyond the door came down in a curtain of scorched crystal and burning metal. The way out vanished. The chamber sealed around them. Kalen pulled Valia close, turned his back to the collapsing wall, and folded himself over her. The void flame closed in. The atmospheric shock wave came from below. A pressure release from the reactor venting systems finally catching up to the cascade. And it hit the chamber like a held breath finally exhaled. The void flame collapsed inward and died. Just like that. Gone. As though it had never decided to exist in the first place. Rescue teams found Kalen face down over the princess, his respirator cracked, his back scored from the heat. They had to pry his arms open to get to her. He woke in the medical bay 3 days later to white light and the particular stillness of a room that had been quiet for a long time. His back ached in a way that suggested the healing units had done significant work and expected some gratitude for it. He sat up. A palace attendant informed him, in a tone carefully stripped of all personal opinion, that the queen would receive him at his earliest convenience. The throne room was enormous and cold and built for exactly one purpose: to make everyone standing in it feel small. Queen Zylara sat at its center like a fact, tall, silver-eyed, her posture a structure that had never once considered softening. The full royal court lined the walls in silence. She read from a scroll that looked older than the palace itself, the law of the preserved heir, invoked twice in 3 centuries. Any non-royal individual whose direct physical action preserved the life of the imperial heir, at direct and documented risk to their own, became legally bound to the royal line. Immediately, irrevocably. Kalen stood very still. Irrevocably, the queen repeated, as though she'd read his expression. He had no answer for that, no clause to cite, no protocol to reference. He was a maintenance engineer from a mid-tier colony world who had lifted a pillar because no one else was moving, and now the Empire had paperwork on him. The ceremony was scheduled for 6 days out. He spent most of those days in a borrowed room on the palace's eastern ring, learning the names of things he was suddenly expected to know. Titles, customs, the correct angle at which to acknowledge a court official of the 3rd tier, and trying with limited success to locate any version of his future that looked familiar. He was standing on the eastern balcony, watching Perseus' cloud layer ignite in the long amber of its setting suns, when he heard the door. Valia moved carefully, still carrying the stiffness of recovery, and stopped at the railing beside him without speaking. Below them, the planet's upper atmosphere glowed in slow, rolling gold. He didn't look at her directly. She didn't look at him. Then her hand found his. Not a grip, barely even a touch. Just her fingers resting against the back of his hand, tentative. The way someone tests a surface before trusting their weight to it. He didn't move. Neither did she. The blade came on the 4th day of ceremony proceedings, fast and low, aimed at the gap between Valia's shoulder and her ceremonial collar. Kalen caught the angle half a second before impact. Something in the way the court official on her left had shifted his weight, the specific stillness of a man about to stop pretending. And he stepped into it. The edge caught him beneath the ribs. He took it, turned the attacker's wrist, and put him on the floor. The court erupted. Guards closed in from every side. Valia's hand locked around his arm, keeping him upright. Her grip nothing like the tentative thing on the balcony. It was firm, certain, the grip of someone who had already made a decision. He looked at her. She looked back. When the wound was significant, but the healing units had practice with him now. The wedding broadcast reached 43 systems. Kalen stood at the ceremonial threshold in clothes that fit better than anything he'd ever owned, beside a woman he had known for less than 2 weeks, in front of a court that had spent most of those 2 weeks deciding whether to accept him. The queen watched from her seat with an expression that had moved fractionally from assessment to something quieter. When Valia's hand found his during the binding rite, steady, unhesitating, fingers lacing through his with the kind of certainty that takes time to grow, and yet had apparently decided to grow quickly. He stopped looking for the version of his future that looked familiar. Later on the balcony, Perosia's clouds burned gold beneath them again. Her hand remained in his. The grip had not loosened. It didn't need to.